A-Train. Is that A-Train? Yes. Okay. Good morning. Thank you all for coming. I'm Gifford Miller. I have the great pleasure of serving as the board chair of the Center for an Urban Future. So thank you all for being here this morning. One of the things I love about the Center for an Urban Future is that it consistently raises the visibility of overlooked and underappreciated issues, a key first step to sparking new policies and investments. And over the years, by elevating opportunities and ideas, CUF has contributed to vital new investment in public libraries, student success programs at CUNY, initiatives for supporting low-income entrepreneurs, and many, many other critical programs and services. The great thing about our reports is they don't just sit on a shelf. We write them by being serious about actually looking at the problem and then thinking about, in a non-predetermined way, what are the sorts of solutions that aren't just, ideal, but also practical. And that's why so much progress gets made as a result of the work that we do. And I do, it's not in here, but I want to say this. This is amazing. Can the staff of the Center for an Urban Future please stand up? Everybody else sit down. But I mean, I don't know how it happens. It's like magic. And this is all before AI. They're not just charging these things out with AI. But the amount of content and everything else that we do is incredible with so few people. And so I want to thank the staff for their amazing, amazing work in making all of us look good. In recent years, it's been great to see CUF having a similar catalytic impact around parks. CUF has long made the case for city leaders to boost public funding for parks. A few years back, A New Leaf report contributed to a $43 million increase in city funding for parks maintenance. And earlier this month, we published a report calling on the city to reverse decades of underfunding for public recreation. But after years of parks getting the short end of the stick in the city budget, and as New York confronts an unfortunate widening budget deficit, it's time for the city to develop new revenue streams to help fund parks directly. Over the past few years, in partnership with the NYC Green Fund, CUF has been advancing concrete ideas for how city leaders can establish new revenue mechanisms for parks. CUF wrote about the opportunity to create a ticket surcharge at sporting events that would support parks. It's like obvious, incredible, and sort of interesting that it hasn't happened yet, but it can, and maybe this is the moment. We made the case for a modest increase in new concessions in parks across the 5 boroughs as a way of boosting parks funding. And yesterday, CUF published a new report outlining ideas for how the city can create new dedicated revenues for parks by capturing value from real estate, which makes sense also because real estate benefits from good parks. That's just an economic fact. So it's actually good for both parties if real estate can contribute, and that's why we have bids. I mean, so everybody understands this. But if we can do it more broadly, it'll help parks and help real estate, and most of all, help New Yorkers. Today's forum will delve into these ideas and for tapping real estate to create recurring revenues for parks, and a big thank you to the NYC Green Fund for making today's event possible and for supporting our research on revenue streams for supporting parks. I want to thank also our amazing speakers, including council members Shekhar Krishnan and Ty Hankerson, and I want to acknowledge, because this is what you do, our former council member Stephen Levin, who's here today. And now please join me in welcoming our next speaker, Heather Lubov, the Executive Director of the City Parks Foundation.
Good morning. I'm very happy to be here today representing the New York City Green Fund. Its roughly 20 supporters and its 2 co-chairs, Arturo Garcia Costas of the New York Community Trust and Chelsea Smith of the Altman Foundation. When we first came together with a group of parks conservancies to advocate for relief funding for parks, and then when we got together with the foundations that helped create the Green Fund, it was an emergency at the start of COVID. And the donors gave generously, but said to us that their support was meant to be a Band-Aid, not a permanent solution to funding maintenance and operations of parks. When the emergency subsided, parks funding from the city did not substantially increase, and the inequity that exists in the system became even more stark. The beauty of the NYC Green Fund as a pooled fund comprised of many donors is that it gets private money into the hands of grassroots groups across the city through Partnerships for Parks, which is our joint program with New York City Parks, its outreach networks, and our local community knowledge. It's very difficult for a single individual or foundation to be able to do this level of grassroots outreach, but since this is our bread and butter, we've been able to bring private dollars to communities that would truly not have seen this funding otherwise. With this in mind, we decided to keep the Green Fund going. Today, we raise and redistribute $2.5 million annually, and with a new fundraising campaign, I'm hoping that that number will go up. 80% of grants are made in environmental justice areas, and more than 60% of grants are made to groups with BIPOC leaders. But there's another component to the fund, and it brings us back to the supporters not being happy with the status quo. They had us build in grants specifically to support systemic change. You can think of the Trust for Public Lands study on the economic impact of parks in New York City, which helped generate data that we had not previously had. Or the RAIN Coalition piloting the maintenance of critical green infrastructure to share with the city for future planning. And now, CUF and the series of reports that they've put together about alternative funding opportunities. My hope is that we, as park stewards and public realm champions, can work alongside CUF and our partners in government to put ideas into action to support an equitable and well-funded parks and open space system across the city, which is what all New Yorkers deserve. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Heather. And can we get a big hand for the NYC Green Fund? Right, and also, before we got here today, I looked at the great RSVP list, all the folks that are here today, and I know so many of you are doing so much to care for and advocate for our parks and green spaces. So a big thanks to all of you. So I'm not going to take long. As Gifford mentioned, my colleagues and I at the Center published a new report yesterday titled Capturing Real Estate Value to Generate Dedicated Funding for New York City's Parks. The report's key takeaways are pretty straightforward. With the city facing a huge budget deficit and the mayor's preliminary budget reducing funding for parks in New York City by $33 million, we absolutely should be identifying new, stable revenue streams for parks. One of the best opportunities to do that is by generating new dedicated funding for the city's parks by capturing a small share of the real estate value that parks help create. And make no mistake, as Gifford mentioned, parks do play a huge role in driving property values across the city. Our 5 ideas for capturing value from real estate to fund parks include: first, tie new development from upzoning to dedicated funding for parks maintenance, operations, and programming. 2, establish a value capture district along the Interborough Express corridor that dedicates a portion of the new property tax revenue generated by development near IBX stations to creating and sustaining nearby parks. 3, dedicate a small share of real estate-related tax revenues to parks through a community park surcharge on the real property transfer tax or the mortgage recording tax. 4th, make it easier to establish parks improvement districts, self-levy districts that dedicated to supporting parks and open spaces. And last, establish a parks improvement trust to equitably allocate new revenues generated through value capture mechanisms. I hope you'll all check out the full report. You can do so by clicking on the QR code that's on everybody's printed agenda. A big thanks to the team that worked on, researched, and wrote the report, including Tim Tompkins, John Sirico, and Eli Dvorkin. Can we get a hand for all of them, please? And echoing Gifford, a big, big thank you to CUF's amazing staff for putting together this event and for all they do, from the research to the editing to the production. Now I'm was going to say I'm thrilled to introduce our next speaker, but is the next speaker here, Stephanie? No. So we're going to get right to our first panel, and then Ty Hankerson, the City Council Parks Chair, is going to come up, I think, either when he gets here or after the first panel. We'll just roll with it, but anyway, let's get on with the show. Thank you.
All right, good morning. Oh, let me get that low.
Okay.
Can everybody hear us okay? Fantastic. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Eli Dvorkin, Editorial and Policy Director at the Center for an Urban Future. Such a pleasure to be joined today by two incredible parks champions and advocates for our city, Councilmember Shekhar Krishnan and Adam Ganzer, Executive Director of New Yorkers for Parks. Gentlemen, welcome. So glad to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
So we want to get into this topic around generating dedicated revenues for parks. But first, just briefly, I'd love to have you help us set the table in terms of where we are today. As Jonathan mentioned, the city's Parks Department is facing a cut compared to last year's adopted budget. Maybe, Councilmember, I'll start with you. Where are we right now when it comes to investing adequately in our park system? You've been chairing, obviously, participating in the budget hearings this year around Parks and Recreation. Where are we right now? What do you see as the consequences for our park system given where funding stands today?
Well, first of all, good morning, everyone. It's so nice to see you all, and thank you to Jonathan, John, Eli, everyone from Center for Urban Future for hosting another great conversation around these issues. It is bittersweet. I'm no longer the Parks Chair, but you're in good hands with Councilmember Hankerson, and once a Parky, always a Parky, as we know. So I'm still keeping my oversight eyes on the Parks Department, too, and all that we're doing there. But I think, Eli, you said it best. It is, and I mentioned this at the hearing last week, too, it is such a critical moment for our parks and public spaces in New York City. You have really a city government from City Hall to the City Council that believes fundamentally in public space, in the importance of urbanism, and a key part of that is investing in green space, which is why it is disappointing, and I said it at the hearing too, that our preliminary budget does not actually include any increase whatsoever for the Parks Department. There is a reduction. At some level, it's about these one-shot positions that will get funded by the council again, but that's also a problem, right? That we're funding parks workers lines with these temporary 1 year, constantly expiring deals. And I think just taking a step back from it all, representing a district with the least amount of green space in all of New York City, in Jackson Heights and Elmhurst, Queens, I think we need a far more ambitious, transformative vision for parks. This kind of back and forth is not going to cut it. It is something that, the last 4 years, we've had to deal with cuts and reversals and cuts and reversals. And I was proud that we started 4 years ago getting the largest budget for parks in our city's history. But that was supposed to be a starting point, and that was never, and it wasn't the case after that. And here we are again. And I think we're never going to get out of this rut, this constant dance back and forth, unless we're leading first with a vision for how we want to create green space in this city, rather than seeing it as a line item on a budget, which disappointingly it is right now.
Well, thank you, Councilmember. Adam, I'll bring you into, and part of it is I'm thinking about the role that advocates play in participating in the system that the Councilmember is describing. That so much energy, oxygen is taken up with fighting for restorations, arguing over the course of 6 months for a budget that just gets back to kind of where we were, with the consequences, as the Councilmember mentioned, for planning, for strategy, to be able to reliably, plan. We're going to have this headcount going forward. We're going to be able to invest in this vision. And you've been really vocal about this, Adam. So help me understand both where you see as the challenges facing the system right now, but also, is now the time to focus finally on dedicated revenue streams, with so much of the conversation right now focusing on Albany's role in helping the city out of a budget crunch. Can the city step up and play a role in generating revenue streams that are within the city's control?
Yeah, I think that there's a few things. I think the situation right now is actually quite dire. The $33 million cut is, as Shekhar pointed out, was money that was largely funded by the city council. But There's also nearly 600 positions that were lost under the Adams administration. And on top of it, right now, there's a negotiation between the administration and the Parks Department about lifting the hiring freeze, the terms being that the Parks Department would have to shed off another 100 vacancies. So you're talking about many hundreds of parks workers and staffing lines at a moment where we're all in our parks way more than we used to be. As an advocate, I would very much like to not bang my head against the wall on this budget dance every single year. We put out a platform called Parks 2030 talking about master plans for parks where they're needed most, talking about parks and the environment. Big picture things that we would much rather spend our time on rather than how many one-shots do we have, who's going to lose their job. Important issues, but really I think we could be doing a lot better. As far as the time, is the time right? We're long overdue for revisiting how we're funding our parks. I personally think there's plenty of money in the budget to get our parks to be well-funded as it is, but it just doesn't happen because of politics. 8 of the 10 best park systems, according to the Trust for Public Land, have dedicated revenues, whether it's property tax or income tax. New York used to be in the top 5 every year. We've fallen down to 13. So we are definitely not doing what we need to do, and it's time for a change.
Well, let's talk about what that change could look like. So, Councilmember, let me ask you a little bit about this. I think one thing that struck us in the research is that New York has these models for capturing value from real estate, for working on a case-by-case basis to ensure that there are investments in parks and open space as part of, for instance, new development. And you've done this in your own district, including a recent project on Queens Boulevard in Elmhurst. But how do we go from a case-by-case, member-by-member approach to generating some of these returns for New Yorkers to a citywide approach, where whether you think it might be through tying upzoning, or density bonuses to investments in parks, or other mechanisms that we propose, or others that you think might be most useful right now. How do we go from this kind of piecemeal approach to something like a citywide strategy?
That's a great question, and I think, Senator from Preacher, you guys have been really great about your report of suggesting many different ideas to do that. We do need systemic proposals that will address, in a creative way, creating green space where it doesn't exist. Because the fact of the matter is that's part of the challenge here. It's funding the existing green spaces and parks at the levels that they need to be funded at to support the workers, as Adam said, who are there, and the organizations, many of you who are here, who are doing this work. But then there are communities like mine, too, in Jackson Heights, where, as I mentioned, we have the least amount of green space in the entire city. The average New Yorker, or the average green space that every New Yorker has in this city is 200 square feet in terms of access to green space. 200 square feet for every New Yorker. In Jackson Heights residents have, on average, 2 square feet of green space access. So 200 to 2. So you really see the stark difference. And we're not going to solve that problem unless we get creative about creating green space where it doesn't exist. And so we've tried different things in the district that I think could be scaled up in a larger way. One of my biggest projects that I've been a big champion of before getting to the Elmhurst one is Paseo Park. And we have Dawn Siff, the executive director of Alliance for Paseo Park, who's here as well, which is the largest open street in all of New York City, 26 blocks long, a street full of cars that we are now transforming into a linear park in Jackson Heights, and being really creative about the ways that we do that. And we've tried other things like that as well, creating public space that were formerly streets for cars that we're now transforming and bringing green space into it, because we have to do that, otherwise there's no opportunity to create it. I want to talk about the Elmhurst project and then use that to zoom out. We recently, I worked with a developer in Elmhurst to create a really exciting housing project on Queens Boulevard in Elmhurst. Formerly a parking lot for a TD Bank is now going to be transformed into housing that has a strong affordable component too, including affordable housing that is affordable to the residents of Elmhurst that live there, which was very important to me as a housing lawyer before even getting into politics in the first place. And I have to give credit to the developer that was really willing to work together to come up with that vision. But also for me, it's not only about the housing piece, it's when we think about housing, it's how do we think about the larger issues and bring in the supportive community spaces to support the new housing that's coming in. That's the biggest challenge we face in Jackson Heights. You need really both and planning comprehensively. And that includes, that's part of the discussion around thinking about real estate is how do we plan communities in comprehensive ways? And so I've been very focused on if we're doing housing projects, we need things like in Elmhurst, we're bringing the first ever community pool to Elmhurst as part of this project. That's going to be run by It was very exciting. It's going to be run by a nonprofit organization that does great work in Queens, offering free to low-cost swim lessons for immigrant families in my district that otherwise wouldn't have access to a swimming pool. And I'm also working on bringing the first ever community center to Jackson Heights as part of my work too, which absolutely. And these are the kinds of things that I'm focused on. As part of that, we need to think about green space. And so the project in Elmhurst originally was a much, much larger project. And I worked with the Department of City Planning, the developers, to say, I can't sort of, allow a rezoning and give the benefit of a rezoning to property owners that I've never met with and I don't know. So we need to scale back this rezoning to really focus on those who want to engage with our office. And we did. When the rezoning was as large as it was, it triggered a city law that requires the creation of public green space as part of that zoning. But when we scaled back the rezoning, that requirement went away. However, the developer, knowing that it was really important to me to have community and public space as part of this project, that I could only support a rezoning that would do that, offered to still create the green space that was no longer required as part of this project, and obviously have it as public green space too, which did two things. One, it made sure that this was a priority for our district for this project, even if it was no longer required. And two, it is going to be the first green space that I can even think of on Queens Boulevard, which has been a highway for a long time. It's been called the Boulevard of Death until we did a number of public safety improvements there. Now you'll actually have green space that didn't exist before on what has been a highway before, on what had been a bank parking lot before. So housing, a pool, and green space. That's how I think you plan comprehensively. And what that showed me also was there's a larger policy perspective we can push here, which is too often in our city, we're not thinking about prioritizing public space and green space as part of development. There's been for a long time the requirement of bringing in parking with housing. And I say, why parking? Why not parks? So it's really a policy choice that we're making that is to the detriment of so many communities like my own that don't need more parking. We need more park space. And I think if we can do with one project, we can scale it up around the city, especially with City of Yes now and all of these incentives to build. We have to also tie it to citywide requirements to bring in access to green space. That's how you really not only build housing, but make sure that housing has the supported spaces around it to support the new residents that are coming in or to support the new units that are coming into. And I think that's something we should push for.
That's great, Councilmember. And I think really echoes one of our recommendations in our report, which is about leveraging the IBX to do exactly this, which will run through several neighborhoods with have that very low density of park space per capita. Areas like, in East Flatbush and Midwood and Brooklyn and getting up toward Elmhurst as well. And that's part of our thinking around how can you create new green space where it's needed, leveraging some value capture along the 17 new stations that will be created along that route. But I think there's also an equally powerful pressing need, if not greater, around maintaining what we've got. And Adam, I want to bring you in on this. I think part of the challenge that the city faces is even as capital dollars have flowed to parks and open space, the maintenance hasn't kept pace. And we've seen, especially when capital dollars were cheap, we're obviously in a higher interest rate environment now, but the city did invest in creating green space, not everywhere, not certainly not enough. But as part of that growth, we've now seen even more demand on those limited number of staff that you described earlier, the gardeners, the maintenance workers, the masons, the plumbers, all of whom are overstretched in our system. In nearly every category, we have fewer of those, those full-time staff, maintenance staff in our park system than other major U.S. systems. So how do we fix that? And I guess specific to this point about revenue that would be dedicated to these purposes, can you see some opportunities to capture some of that value from real estate to actually invest in the maintenance that we're falling behind on? How do we do it?
Yeah, and when I referred to the top 10 8 of the top 10 park systems in the country, they are doing exactly that. Those are tax revenues that are going towards maintenance of the entire city. And I wanted to build on what Shaker was saying, which is, the sort of original revenue model when we're talking about alternative revenues in New York City was the Conservancy, which is a philanthropic model, one that has really worked for many parks, but can't work really beyond those parks in terms of really generating philanthropic dollars, raising money. And they are isolated to individual parks, similar with the PID system, where there are certain areas where that can become successful, but it's not going to become a city-wide model. So I think these are useful strategies in building revenues for specific parks. But I think I'd like to focus more on the real estate revenue proposal that you put forward, which is revenue for the entire park system. It's not just parks, it's rec centers, it's the entirety of the system, which is what many of these other cities are doing. And I think that's the biggest hurdle. That would be the best case scenario, including all of the proposals, frankly, but that would be the best case scenario to creating a fully equitable park system. And so I feel like the time really is now. We've looked at this over the years, 20 years. I looked at a report from New Yorkers for Parks from 20 years ago, and similar proposals in there. But I don't know, since the 80s, the park system has been improving. It feels like we're falling backwards. And it feels like there's an opportunity for this to become a much more important conversation, particularly when we're talking about budget deficits.
Yeah, that's helpful. I mean, I think it strikes me that I don't know, council member, that any mayor, any city elected official wants to be known as, a leader who reduced funding for our parks and open spaces. But it strikes me that the challenge is only going to grow. I mean, closing the gap this year, the deficit this year is one thing. The out-year gaps, grow substantially to 10 billion or more. And getting there while also investing in other areas of priority, I think, is going to become increasingly challenging. So I guess I wanted to ask you maybe first, and both of you guys, around what is the path forward? If there is generally some agreement here that the city needs more investment in parks and open space than we're getting, that part of the recipe to get there is dedicated recurring revenues that can help sidestep the budget dance, that this is potentially going to be more important than ever given the out-year gaps and the other genuine priorities, everything from universal childcare to investing more in affordable housing. I'm curious for your thoughts about not just what the ideas are, but how do we get there? What are some of the steps that would have to be taken, whether that's around moving beyond or building on City of Yes to create new incentives that work for smaller projects, that dedicate dollars toward, as we recommend in our report, a Parks Improvement Trust, or new mechanisms that would potentially capture value along the IBX, or making it easier to create parks improvement districts or other things. How do we get there? What are some of the steps that you think would be essential for moving this forward in the next few months?
Well, I think, that's really, I think, at the heart of our discussion today and the heart of Cuff's report, too. I would say it's three different ways. First is, as I mentioned before, we have to change our perspective around parks. We know it, but too often parks are treated as amenities or luxuries, and they're not. They are rights, and access to them are fundamental rights that we all have and we all deserve. We need a budget that reflects that. I don't accept the premise that, because of budget shortfalls and deficits and things like that, that we can't fund our parks. I just reject that, because I think that the budget is a series of choices. We've got a $116 billion budget as of last year. Mayor's proposed budget this year of $127 billion. You can find the funds in there to fund our green spaces. It's not that difficult. It's a choice. And so I think part of it is to really have that perspective and dedicate the revenue streams. And I know in our city council, I see our amazing parks chair has joined us too. Councilmember Ty Hankerson is here as well. I know Councilmember Hankerson and I will be fighting together to make sure that we fight for those investments and we secure those investments, although we do need a city hall that is also prioritizing it the same way. But first of all, it's a perspective shift. Second of all, I think it is finding creative ways to, in the budget, remove parks from the whims of the budget fights. And I think about that, and it's kind of just off the cuff too, but I just recently held our oversight committee hearing, and one of the things that asked both the OMB director about at our OMB budget hearing and then the DOI hearing was DOI's proposal, which I think is a very good one, of not tying the Department of Investigation budget to the ups and downs of a city budget, that their function, their role is too important, their independence is too important, and we saw under the Adams administration the cuts to a DOI budget that was responsible in many ways for the federal indictments that were brought. And DOI's proposal was the one that was similar to other cities, which was just tie the Department of Investigation budget to a percentage of the city budget. And so it rises and falls based on that percentage. And I like that idea a lot. But I also don't see why it can't apply to other critical agencies too, like the Parks Department. We're already doing that fight with 1%. But I would say it's more than 1%, number one. But two, it's more than just one off year. It's really to say these are certain critical priorities that no matter the ups and downs of budget negotiations and fights, we do not want these to be affected and to be bartered as part or exchanged as part of a negotiation. And the Parks Department and funding public space, especially in this climate crisis we're in, strikes me as one of those things where we should say it should always be funded at a certain level and it should not be tied to the subject of budget negotiations, but rather tied to the overall city budget at a minimum of 1% to catch up with other cities, if not more. So I think we need creative solutions like that too. And the third piece is what you mentioned, Eli, which is as we fight for that, coming up with creative ways, whether it's a parks improvement district, whether it's policies like parks and not parking when it comes to real estate development, can we create incentives to, require or really guide developers or other, larger government agencies that are doing development projects like IBX? Can we guide them towards a choice where it is more valuable to invest in parks, even for them too, than it is not to. And I think there are things that we can do to help frame the choice and frame the framework that they're operating in that we haven't explored enough, but I think that is one of those proposals too, from a land use standpoint.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you, Councilmember. Yeah,
I want maybe get a little bit more tactical on some of these things, because my fear with a lot of this is that we talk about it and we've talked about it and we've talked about it and there isn't a way to actually make it happen. But I think the first thing, and it's going to sound a little weird, but get the agency out of the conversation and get the agency to advocate for itself. Until the Parks Department says we need, it can be ignored. And right now, the agency is sort of not allowed to talk about what their needs are. The second thing we need political champions, elected leaders that can champion these ideas. A lot of them may require state involvement. Who's the leader at the state level that's going to invest in this? And certainly at the administration, this is an economic development issue as much as it's any other issue. And so how do we get this conversation out of operations into discussions with economic development and other leaders within the administration?
Can I add one more point too? I think it's important. I think Adam really hit this as well. And so I just add on to both of what we said. Apart from all of those things, policy, politics, I think we have to keep harnessing the power of everyone in this room. There are 8.5 million people that use our green spaces and parks every single day. There should be 17 million voices every day putting pressure on our city government to deliver for our parks. And so, our green spaces are calm, serene places, but there should be nothing serene or calm about our organizing for these green spaces. And so I think we've got to really keep thinking of ways to elevate the public pressure around investing in parks in really concrete ways that make everyone pay attention and realize that this is something that it's not forgivable to not fund it at the levels that we need to.
Well, I certainly appreciate that message, and I think part of the challenge has been, for many everyday New Yorkers who value and use their parks more than ever, there's a sense of we just want government to take care of this problem for us, But when we look at the data, it really reflects that New Yorkers feel like the park system is not cared for adequately. When you ask New Yorkers rather than just the agency, you hear, for instance, in the Bronx, that nearly 2/3 of Bronx residents say that their parks are in fair or poor condition. And overall numbers across New York City are a little bit better than that, but still show that, in many cases, 30, 40% or more of New Yorkers say parks aren't where they need to be in terms of that basic maintenance and upkeep. I think the challenge becomes, what is the solution there? It gets wonky. It gets very technical. It's harder for folks to grasp what are we advocating for beyond, hey, we want to see substantial and sustained investment in our parks. I think what we're trying to put forward in our research are some practical ideas that can change that annual budget dance, can change that narrative. But I know that I think it's challenging to communicate those specifics to the New Yorkers who are passionate about their parks, but maybe less passionate about this is a mechanism that really makes sense, a parks improvement trust that can be funded through multiple revenue streams that could generate dedicated recurring revenue. We can hold parks harmless so that city investment doesn't fall to compensate for that increase. It gets into the weeds fairly quickly. I wanted to ask both of you about, is there a specific idea that you think could really help New Yorkers capture what we're talking about here? So whether it's something like looking at Flushing Meadows, Adam, which I know you talked about before, $1 from tickets sold at the U.S. Tennis Center, going to Flushing Meadows, or something that feels like a specific, concept. Maybe parks not parking is kind of a step in the right direction that can help New Yorkers get their head around the idea, hey, if we're able to put some fairly simple ideas into practice, we can generate the kind of dedicated revenue that we've lacked for years and start to make a difference in terms of when you tell us, leaders, policymakers, that only 30, 40% of folks in your neighborhood think your park's in good shape. We want to change that. We want to change that metric. And I'm curious, are there one or two specific ideas or next step that you think could help New Yorkers get behind the kinds of changes that we're talking about today?
I think this is true for regardless of what you're trying to push. If you're trying to push 1% or you're trying to push a percentage of the transfer tax on real estate, what do people understand? They understand, and I'm making broad generalization, they understand if their park is clean, if they can go into the bathroom. So I think you have to tie whatever policy change we're making to something very specific that somebody's going to feel or see when they go into their park. I spoke, when we were doing a report on 1% about 4 years ago, I spoke with a woman who was running a campaign in Pittsburgh to propose a levy or a surcharge tax for funding for parks. And they had built out all sorts of messaging around this. Less of the messaging was on the mechanism and more of the messaging was on the result because there was a clear need. So I think that any type of campaign really has to meet people where they are. Most people are not in real estate surcharge or parks improvement districts. They're not. That's not where their head is at. Their head is at, I want a clean, safe park. But again, I think for me, when I'm thinking through all of these things, I'm mostly thinking, all right, what are the machinations that have to happen in order for this to become a possibility? Who are the leaders in city and state government that would have to be involved to make this come true? And then what would the campaign be around it? But understanding all of those factors before you even start talking about what the campaign looks like.
I completely agree with Adam on that point. I think rather than asking which budget mechanism, could work best, it's stepping back and really finding a way to excite, motivate New Yorkers to come out and fight for their parks. And sometimes in politics, right, it's the thing that you want, it's a better budget, is not the thing that you go out there and talk about, because the budget is not going to excite people, unfortunately, and really being very real about it. It's the way to achieve what we want. But I do think we can all do more to really highlight what we want in our parks. And it's really, at a time when New Yorkers want to feel safe, they want a clean city, they want a city with effective government services, our parks is such a quality of life issue that we can highlight, right? Like why when we go into our parks, we are worried about whether our parks are going to be clean or not. Why, something that Councilmember Kevin Riley, Crystal Hudson, and I have been working on, why is it that when we play basketball in our parks, so many of our rims don't have nets on them across the city, right? Why is it that as a parent, if I want to change my kid's diaper, which I'm thankfully out of that phase now, if the park's bathroom is closed, that's a big issue when my kids need to go to the bathroom or have their diaper changed. But if we can tie it to these everyday issues that people feel frustrated about, we can channel that energy towards achieving the solutions that will help get our parks there at a very basic level to make them cleaner, to make them safer. And I do think that energy is there. Like I said before, everyone uses our parks. We depend on our green spaces. We just got to keep thinking about ways to tap into that and make people really feel every day that, hey, if my city prioritized our parks more, we can feel the difference it would make in our lives. And we're doing a lot of that already with all the groups in this room. I think we can keep pushing on that.
Well, on that optimistic note, Shaker, thank you so much, Adam. Thank you both so much for joining us today. We so appreciate your time and your thoughts.
Absolutely.
And I'd love to invite up, another great you mentioned the importance of champions for parks. I'd love to invite up another great champion for parks. Councilmember Ty Hankerson is here, the chair of the New York City Council's Parks Committee, and a longtime parks advocate. Councilmember, why don't you come up and join us?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I don't know if the mic is on. Can you hear me? All right. Well, first, let me just say to my predecessor in this role, Shaker Krishnan, who is a champion, I'm trying to live up to all that you've done in this role, so thank you for paving that way. Adam, thank you for your work and advocacy for our parks. Where did Adam go? Oh, there we go. And also, thank you to Cuff for inviting me this morning. So to my colleagues, the panelists, and everyone here who cares about the future of our parks, my name is Ty Hankerson. I was recently elected about 88 days ago, sworn in about 88 days ago. And it has been an exciting ride thus far. Although it's been exciting, we obviously have been faced with challenges early on, and I am looking forward to working with each and every one of you to ensure that we are not just receiving what we need for our parks, but that we are all in lockstep together in that fight. New York depends on its parks, and furthermore, our Parks Department. They serve as our gathering spaces, cooling spaces, playgrounds, and recreation centers. The department, as well as many of our advocates, care for our trees, which improves our air quality and heat index and act as natural flood prevention systems. That is why it is so frustrating that New York still does not invest in our parks the way it should. The parks budget has not only failed to increase to the 1%, as the mayor promised, but instead has dropped by about $33 million in the preliminary budget. Though these numbers are not set in stone, it is a prime indicator of the level of priority this administration has placed parks thus far. We spend less on our parks than other comparable cities. New York currently spends $235 per capita on parks. Seattle spends $415, and San Francisco spends about $470. Think about that. Low-income neighborhoods still have less access to open space, and communities of color still have fewer park resources close to home. In addition, more than 1.1 million New Yorkers do not live within a 10-minute walk of a full-size park. If we are serious about quality of life, then parks have to be funded in a way that reflects that across the 5 boroughs, especially in the neighborhoods that need it the most. And if the city is going to keep falling short, then we need to get creative and start thinking about different ways that we can care for our parks. I think we heard in the conversation this morning or just a few minutes ago that there are several ways that we can explore to ensure that our parks are funded. It is incumbent on us to explore and exhaust every avenue that generates more revenue. Parks also raise nearby property values, which is why the city has to do a better job of bringing some of that value back to the parks that helped create it. Some states and cities use dedicated sales tax for parks, and some have found ways to direct more money from development near parks right back into those parks. That can mean air rights transfers near certain parks. It can mean local districts that help fund maintenance. It can mean zoning bonuses in return for investment in parks. Other cities have tried versions of those ideas in park planning and park development. Whatever it is, We simply cannot sit back and wait for it to be handed to us. As my colleague Shaker mentioned, we all have to be in lockstep together in this fight, and we also can't be calm about our fight. We have to be loud about it. If we as a city are able to create new revenue for parks, that money has to reach the parks, rec centers, green and water spaces that are in need of the most support. And we need to ensure that City Hall does not use the new revenue as an excuse not to fund the 1%. I look forward to continuing this work with you all and exploring new ideas and strategies that will serve the betterment of all of our parks. That being said, baselining city funding for parks, the 1%, is still our #1 priority. And we will continue putting the administration's feet to the fire until we get there. Thank you for having me this morning.
Good, how are you? Oh, you too. All right.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, I don't know that we're quite where we need to be to start off this the second panel. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
All right, with the weather turning and April's here and the flowers are blooming, we got to bring that parks energy to this conversation. So, and thank you also to everyone who's tuned in online. I know we have, I think, over 100 folks that are streaming this event this morning. So we see you as well. If anybody's in the back of the room and would like to move forward, come in, get cozy. We've got some seats right in the front. Please take a minute, get in, get comfortable.
That's an invitation.
Don't be shy. My name is Eli Dvorkin. It's such a pleasure to be moderating today's conversation. I will just briefly mention who's joining me here on the stage. Their full bios are you can scan the QR codes that you received, and you can read more about our amazing panelists. But I'll just briefly mention I'm joined today by Claire Weiss, who truly puts the W in WXY, founding principal of WXY. Chris Rizzo, partner at Carter Ledger to Milburn. Majora Carter, real estate developer and community developer, urban revitalization consultant, author, multi-hyphenate. I'm running out of hyphens, but Majora, great to have you with us.
Those are good.
Katie Denny Horowitz, who's the executive director of the North Brooklyn Parks Alliance, and Lynn Kelly, the executive director of the New York Restoration Project. Everybody join me in a round of applause. Just welcome our amazing panelists. Thank you all so much for being here. And a special thank you again to Parks Chair Ty Hankerson and Councilmember Shaker Krishnan. Adam, really appreciate all of your thoughts this morning. So we heard a lot about why we're here today. The situation that New York faces when it comes to reliable funding for parks and open space to be able to care and maintain these vital spaces for New Yorkers, to build the new green spaces that New Yorkers need and deserve, to be able to keep pace with growing challenges, including greater usage, climate change, increasing pressures on our park system. But we really want to focus this conversation on how do we change this? How do we change the status quo today, the chronic budget fights, the underinvestment over not just years, but really decades in parks and recreation, and green space? And one big idea that we put forward in our report that we published yesterday is around both creating and capturing a portion of the value in real estate to be able to fund our park system, not just more, but crucially more equitably. And so I'd like to start maybe, Chris, with you, because some of our thinking about this flows back to a couple of years ago when we first published a report with 20 ideas to generate dedicated recurring revenue for parks. And you were really, really vocal in saying, real estate is where we should be looking in this moment. That was a couple of years ago. It strikes us that urgency has only grown since then with the budget challenges that the city faces. So, Chris, let me ask you a little bit about, we know that parks help create this enormous value for land value, real estate value, and that so little of it is captured to reinvest back into our system. Should real estate play a bigger role in funding parks around the city? And, what are we leaving on the table today?
That's a great question. Thank you. Thank you for having me up here again. I think that word value is really important this morning because if we're going to have an adequately maintained park system in New York, I think we have to look at real estate and real estate values, number one. I think, though, that we have to look at it a little differently. It's not about capturing real estate value to fund parks. It's about recapturing from real estate the value that parks create for real estate. We all know that real estate around well-maintained parks is incredibly valuable. People want to live there. Developers want to build there. There's more housing production there. And so it's about harnessing systems that can recapture that value. And, you know, I always say this, but the mechanisms are already on the books. It's not about going to the city council or going to Albany to change laws. New York state law allows us to create zoning incentive programs where the zoning resolution allows the city to give extra floor area to developers in exchange for payments to parks. We really never used that in New York City or around the state. New York state law allows municipalities to create transfers of development rights where parks that have development rights and floor area to sell can sell it for development near the park in exchange for payments to a conservancy, to the park system. We have a business improvement district law at the state and the city level, which allows us to create business improvement districts and park improvement districts around parks to fund park maintenance and streetscape maintenance. We have 2, maybe 3 bids in New York City that are primarily focused on parks. I can talk about changes to city law and state law, and I'd like to have a chance to do that, but we already have some laws on the books that we're not using.
Yeah, this is really helpful, Chris. And I think part of our thinking with the research that we did was how do we make use of what we can already do, what the city can do, rather than waiting for Albany to act. And you know, Lynn, when we first spoke about this, you mentioned some of these very models, these very examples. I'm curious, when you think about, and you've been thinking not only in your current role, but previously as a citywide advocate, thinking about how do we change the status quo around funding parks and open space? And you mentioned that real estate seems like there's some really meaningful opportunities that are doable today. So, I mean, help us understand a little bit more of what you see as the immediate opportunities when it comes to capturing some of that value to invest it.
Sure, and thanks for inviting me back. So I've been thinking a lot about something, and I'm going to get very planning wonky here for a minute, about the transfer of development rights. And that's because it's something that we've been looking at New York Restoration Project. And the city of Yes has opened up opportunities that we didn't have previously. And so bear with me, I'll explain. So the city's park system has thousands, let's just argue for a minute here, available acres off of green thumb lots. They're not mapped parkland, so they actually carry development rights. And they've been protected as community gardens, as well they should, for decades. What if the city proactively decided to sell or transfer those development rights within catchment areas, which is allowed now as a part of the city of Yes, for the purpose of developing affordable housing, right? So in this scenario, the gardens are then stripped of any availability to develop on them. It's almost like creating a permanent easement. It's saying that these gardens will stay because they can only function as gardens. And then the development rights, the air rights that can then get, I love this word, this is actually a technical term now, you can slingshot the development rights within a catchment area for the express purpose of creating density for affordable housing. And it's part of what I've continually been thinking about, that an affordable city, affordable housing, and a quality, well-maintained park system are not mutually exclusive. It's a part of creating. It's not whether you can afford to live in your neighborhood. That's a key part. Can you afford to live there and pay your rent? But is it worth living in? So I've been trying to think of ideas, and that's just one. I'm sure it's not original. But could the city create a system whereby green thumb was really seen as an asset to create affordable housing within areas that need it most? And the follow-up to that would be, could then the city's park system actually retain that revenue and not get it sucked into the general fund? Create some kind of trust or parks improvement system that would be specifically for the maintenance of parks that otherwise don't see the level that they need.
Well, I just want to point out that it is a great idea, and it's really important that you mention that. Hudson River Park, which is run by a state-created entity, because that parkland is zoned. New York state law and the New York City zoning resolution allows the Hudson River Park Trust to sell unused development rights from the piers and the uplands across the West Side Highway for development, and they've done it to great effect, raising, I don't know, to date $200 million for construction and maintenance of Hudson River Park. So it's a really important idea, and it's been done before, and it's perfectly legal. It just requires a little political creativity.
Claire, I see you nodding. If you want to jump in, go for it.
Well, I guess I want to take it a different tack. What I really love about that idea is it focuses on the quality of life and the environment of the neighborhoods people live in. So I think the one thing that we haven't seen is a way to make the whole system of parks, and I'll go back to what Shaker said and what Adam said, which is like, it's about the whole thing: streets, sidewalks, trees, parks. How do you make them better places to live? And I think the focus on, let's imagine a world where the mechanisms you were talking about, but the specific mechanism of putting money from whether it's pockets or even creating air rights that then can go into a fund. Or let's say we actually get pegged 1% to the city budget. The big question I have is, how do you actually affect the kinds of environmental benefits into our system? Right now, we have a lot of degraded and formerly beautiful landscapes around affordable housing. When developers build affordable housing, many of them are able to build beautiful gardens and public space. But there's no maintenance fund for that. There's no help for not-for-profits. And why is that? It's not only, I think, about the supply of money, that's important, but it's because we're not actually looking at all of this as actually an air quality issue, a water quality issue, an environmental justice issue, but also an educational issue. So do we have high school programs that pay high school students to learn how to plant? No, not that I know of. Do we have funds for communities to actually teach or to even bolster seniors' incomes by taking care of parks? No. So I really feel like we can't yet imagine a world that Lynn is talking about that actually is looking at the whole life of districts and neighborhoods. Right now, we do in New York City think that our mechanisms are simply to create wealth that they're going to pass down to our environment, and I'm not convinced.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Claire. And I think, part of what we wanted to explore in our research and what we put forward for this idea of a parks improvement trust is, how do you make sure that the revenue or value capture mechanism can be allocated equitably and support parks across the five boroughs?
That's a big question.
Moving beyond the idea that parks in denser, wealthier neighborhoods have access to tools right now that can help improve their quality.
Right.
And there's, there are very good reasons why those parks look the way that they do. But how do you make sure that those benefits can be extended to every park? And, I think part of the challenge then becomes, what's the mechanism? And part of it is, can the revenue that's generated in one place support parks not only there, but elsewhere? And, Majora, I see you nodding, and I'd love to bring you in. I think part of this is because folks may or may not know in this room that you sit at this intersection of green space creation and advocacy and real estate and community development, having done both of those things now in your home, in your neighborhood in the South Bronx. But in a neighborhood where, as I mentioned earlier, most residents say, my park is not in fair or poor or in good condition. It's in fair or poor condition. So I'm curious for your thoughts about, how do you change that? How do you change it in ways that can support the needs in a place like the South Bronx?
Well, actually, in my neighborhood, which is Hunts Point, which is the area that I was personally responsible for spearheading the development of the first waterfront park we've had in the South Bronx in 70 years at the time, we were actually able to shame the city to ensuring that we had maintenance in our park. Literally.
Yeah.
That's why we got maintenance in our park. Though we tried, to take the idea that, because Claire, I love the idea that you talked about imagination. So, and I know I don't have to tell you this because you've been imagining like an amazing quality of life in resource-rich communities forever. And so I'm sitting here like 20 years after I did that kind of work, and also wrote the first proposal to get $50 million worth of greenway infrastructure dollars, into a community like the South Bronx. And 20 years later, I'm just like, we're having the same discussions.
Yeah.
We're having the exact same discussions. So it's not like we haven't been imagining and actually working toward this. But, Christopher, thank you so much for saying, like, this stuff is out there. And yes, ma'am, that was awesome. But again, this stuff is already here. I mean, I think structurally what we really need to be talking about, is the fact that the system really kind of just reinforces the inequality that we experience for Parks Department. Because honestly, I am not worried about parks and wealthier New York City neighborhoods. Ever. I'm not. There, I said it. I remember really clearly, this was 10 years ago, that because of the conservancy model, doesn't matter, if there's just less than 1% of parks money going, from the city going into parks budget. The conservancy model that will continue to exist, because whether it's real estate or just the folks that are living in those communities, they want their parks to be nice, and they will be. And there was a move, I can't remember the council member who put it out there, that maybe the conservancy should share, because they got a lot. And it was, I thought, like a really generous, wonderful thing. Of course, that was squashed like that. Does anybody remember this? I know I'm not crazy.
Daniel
Thank you.
Squadron, for those who are Dan Squadron, for those who want to
yes.
do their policy wonk research after
There you go.
the event.
And again, nothing. So I feel like we've also seen some real, but I do think that if we just look at what's here, make sure that we're putting it in an equitable lens and pushing it out that way, that could actually help. But first, we've got to acknowledge that we've, had these tools a long time, but we have not been trying to produce and support equality around parks departments. If we just did that alone, I really wouldn't worry about any New York City parks. But we're not even there.
So I want to ask, I want to drill down on this point a little bit more, and then move on to a couple other opportunities that we're envisioning here. But the question, I think, is about mechanisms that can ensure that the dollars can be allocated equitably. And so I want to just bring everybody else back into this point. We did propose this specific mechanism. I think, Lynn, you alluded to it earlier, the idea of a trust. We're thinking in part that there's multiple needs here, right? One is, can a future administration simply reduce parks budget and fill the hole with a trust? There has to be a mechanism to ensure that that is not the case, right? Then there's a separate issue, but just as important, if not more so, around how to make sure that parks with the greatest needs in communities where the underlying economics may not allow for the existing mechanisms to be particularly revenue generating, how can we ensure that mechanisms that apply in, say, a different part of the borough can benefit parks equitably across the borough? So I want to bring you all in and just help us think through a little bit more. If we agree that there are some tools here that are actually really powerful, but how could we design policies that can help address some of those concerns?
I think one of the ideas in your report that will be coming out is the idea of a citywide fund. And if the city council and the city planning commission were to amend the zoning resolution to allow incentive zoning, to allow developers to essentially buy more floor area in exchange for a robust contribution to parks, and if the zoning resolution were amended to allow transfers of development rights from parks that have development rights to sell, those funds from those two mechanisms could be put into a citywide fund, which could be equitably distributed. And so there would be more equity through that program. And I think that it could be done in a way that would bypass the city charter's requirement that the Parks Department turn over its earned revenue to the city's general fund. So that's that issue. In terms of business improvement districts, that's inherently a local model, right? You draw a district, the money that's raised is used for that park and that district. You can't send it to other places in the city. Yes, but the city could make it easier by getting out of its own way in allowing the creation of bids around parks, appropriate parks, around the city so that they could be used in a wider variety of neighborhoods instead of just the more affluent neighborhoods that can organize themselves to do it.
Can I ask you a question, Chris? So is it true that it's you can't really use the bid model in primarily residential, and I would say even industrial spaces. I'm looking at North Brooklyn here, is there's many neighborhoods that don't actually generate the kind of income that other neighborhoods do in terms of the bid model. And also there's parks, but there's also other open spaces, streets, the example of Passaic Park, even downtown Brooklyn, shared streets, that don't necessarily fit within the Conservancy or the bid model.
Yep.
So, question.
Well, Chris, I'm happy for you to answer this too, but I think, Katie, you've been truly invoked at this point of the conversation. So let me bring you in on this. And I think
she's actually creating a bid.
Exactly. I just want to tee this up to say that, that Katie's doing the hard work of actually creating infrastructure to support parks and open space in North Brooklyn through a bid model. So help us understand, walk us through. I mean, first of all, it's striking because obviously we have 87, 88 bids right now in New York City.
78.
Sorry, I'm flipping my numbers around. 78. There's so many bids that exist to support, commercial corridors, sanitation, kind of a primary need. But it strikes me that it's relatively recently that we've seen the efforts that you've spearheaded, and we also see in Gowanus, to make sure that these models can actually be used to support parks and open space, if not solely, then certainly kind of with a primary focus. To help us understand the thinking around for a model that we've had for a long time that's benefited, commercial corridors, to apply that model to parks and open space. What are the challenges there? What are the opportunities there? What should policymakers know about the opportunity to help more community leaders like yourself to be able to apply this model to parks and open space?
Well, I'm glad you brought up Gowanus as well, because, alongside the Gowanus Canal Conservancy, the North Brooklyn Parks Alliance have been looking at bids as a form of a PID, a Parks Improvement District, since well before the pandemic. And I think in part that's, for our two organizations, we're two nonprofits working in environmental or parks and open space causes that are have great impact from a rezoning. And I think that for us, the improvement district model is in part a correction to the lack of planning and foresight that went into that rezoning to begin with. And I think in response to some of the conversations around equity or inequity rather, and need, in the past, the way things have worked, which breed that sort of inequity, is this sort of like trifecta that the council member was talking about earlier. You need like your community voice and champions. You need your elected official who has a parks forward perspective and understands the connection between quality of life issues and say housing. And then you also need the government agencies to accept these models and the developer to be able to make these compromises and make these promises. And I think if going back to a rezoning, and especially in light with your report, one of the words I think that struck me the most in that in your document was unenforceable, right? You talked about unenforceable community benefits, and that's something that we, and I say we with my community board member hat on, going through a number of ULURPs and land use issues, we talk about community benefits a lot. And, the fact that we are, at the precipice of a huge amount of housing, every elected official that I can think of is right now championing more and more housing. And that's at the same time, as we've talked about at length this morning, budget decreases and lack of commitment to increase parks maintenance at the same time that we're looking at housing increases. So a third aspect of this is, of course, the ballot measure that was approved last November that decreased the council members' involvement in securing some of those community benefits. And so one of those community benefits, especially in my community, is parks and open space. And why is that? Because we have an environmental history, and parks creation, waterfront access is paramount and has been since the rezoning. And even though we were starved for open space and parks creation was a part of that rezoning, A, the creation wasn't necessarily enforced, and B, the maintenance dollars that were contemplated during that period just weren't enough to upkeep the land and the parkland that was being created. So in that way, you have an improvement district model, as you say, a self-created, a community-driven model. And what that does is a few things. A, it puts the onus on the community to make that correction, to introduce this model, which could potentially create tension between the community members who would, or businesses that would face that assessment, and the community leaders who are suggesting this as a model, as opposed to the city coming and saying, we need additional funding, and this is a mechanism that exists that we're going to use. So A, it creates tension on the ground, and B, in my case, it is very much a neighborhood-wide approach. So this isn't a single parks district. This is a north side improvement district, which is the sort of geographic boundary that has, Claire, to your point, a number of park spaces, a number of open spaces, so whether it's an open street or a plaza. And the idea was to have a neighborhood district that would be able to support not only the needs of that district. Through a survey that we did, sanitation was paramount, or lack thereof. Given the high density in the area, you can't cross the street without having to sort of jump over mounds of trash. Sanitation was number one. Parks maintenance was number two. And so as the density increases, the last thing I'll say is that the improvement district model is different than some of the other value capture suggestions that you all made, in that this is like a one-to-one. You're not necessarily capturing the value. You are asking the stakeholders to pay for the services for the impact that they're having because of the increased density that they're bringing to the neighborhood. So, in that sense, there's a responsibility among developers to pay for those services that are maintenance needs, that are new maintenance needs that are being created through that density. And I think, leaving it to the community to push these models forward isn't necessarily the most thought through method. I think having those conversations about maintenance needs embedded in the planning conversation is the better way to go to ensure that we do have a more equitable approach, and more important, an equitable standard of the quality of the spaces. Because right now, as it's based on ULURP negotiations and community benefits, it's really about a developer's willing to pay, right? And so from one to another, depending on political pressure, depending on their budgets, depending on their interest in community engagement or community impact, you will have developer A giving back a certain amount, and you'll have developer B doing whatever it is they do. And they should be a little bit more consistent across the board. Sorry, I'm looking at you, Chris.
I like the way that you phrase it as the community is now burdened and responsible for correcting what the city failed to do 20 years ago. The Greenpoint Williamsburg rezoning was visionary in a lot of respects, but its failure to plan for park maintenance and open space maintenance was criminal. And now it's falling upon you guys, the neighborhood, to self-correct by creating a funding mechanism for it. And I'm so glad that you guys are doing this.
I have to say, I'm struck by listening to my colleagues here that I want to pause here for a second. Do you hear what I hear, which is we are, as voters, as colleagues, as practitioners, as community members, twisting ourselves into pretzels, coming up with creative solutions to do what, frankly, government should largely be doing, right? Just think about that for a minute. And we want to be a part of it. We want to come up with a solution. We want to help. But, I suspect they're not panels of people talking about the city's sewer systems or talking about other forms of infrastructure. But here we are doing this. And my point is, we can come up with all the greatest ideas in the world to have a more equitable park system for New York City, but it does not absolve government's responsibility to treat our park system as critical city infrastructure. And I will
Yes.
say that till I am
Agreed.
blue in the face.
No, and you're 100% right. You're 100% right there because but I think it still goes back to the way parks are viewed. They are still considered amenities
Yeah.
for wealthier people, quite frankly. It's a cute thing to have, in less affluent areas. And that's how they are continue to be treated. But to the point about if we actually bothered to because you could be talking about sewage and parks. Actually, we should be.
Yeah, we should
We really should be. There should be no light between those kind of conversations around stormwater management. Okay? Yeah, none of those. Education. We know that green open spaces actually help improve the quality of life, and people respond to better designed green spaces. They just do. Like, we know all these things. There are stats to support this stuff. But again, because we're still looking and responding to parks as this cute thing that's nice to have, but especially, in more affluent areas, and those are the ones that get taken care of no matter what. It's like, I'm sorry, on the way here, the South Bronx Greenway, I'm very excited that it exists. We can actually now go directly on a bike, from here to, I'm not from here, I'm not in the Bronx right now, but, sorry, but from my house, literally, you get on the Greenway. It's mostly just completely off-road, and you could get through Randall's Island. Like, I did that. I'm super excited that I did. However, just like if you look at the greenery, like in there, like I just saw it today, it was like these little spindly, nasty little stick trees that came out and that are now just like, it's like plastic bags, or it's like a Christmas tree with plastic bag ornaments. But then I think about 9A, what was happening when Hudson River Park got built. Densely put together, these little boxwoods, so that it's sort of like a way that, frankly, the wind just blows everything over it and hardly anything gets caught in it. So things were planted in very particular ways.
Deliberate ways.
Bing-it-o.
Yeah.
That's just bing. I don't know why I added an extra syllable to that. But yes, and I think if we just have to, and at this point, I'm coming out of this in a way, it's like I almost don't expect anybody to really care about low-income communities. I just don't. So that's why it's like linking them together. If we can come up with that, then, around stormwater management, education, health issues, all of those things, then maybe, and think of parks as infrastructure that needs to be supported in that way, then take the people that I honestly do believe that no one really cares about. Because if we did, we wouldn't have such an glaringly unequal system that we deal with right now.
Can I add to that a plea for more? So I think that New York is a very wonderful and particular example of everyone in all neighborhoods is very ambitious about everything. And that, you look at what happened with the Rockaway Boardwalk. There is, in fact, if there's a will to have something better, then it clearly gets supported, and people get very upset if more is not the case. Yeah. Now, more and better. We should have the best designed parks in the world. We should have the best designed green streets. But what we're really missing is right now we have a very siloed world. Trees are barely maintained on city streets. It takes years and years to get one. Never mind the beautiful planting that should be underneath all of them. And why is that? I think it's because we don't have a kind of construct of government that says this is actually together. So I do think that some of what we need to do is say that we want more park space, not less. Now, right now, I would say that people think they can only maintain what we have, but if we don't invest in more public land and getting more park space and converting more streets to green, even part of the street, then a generation from now, we will have not served the next generation very well. So I really do worry about, and we should be, maintaining the parts of today, but what about the open space of tomorrow? We're not, I think we equally have to push for that.
I wanted to address your question before, Claire, about business improvement districts and residents. That was your question, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And there are a bunch of myths about business improvement districts and park improvement districts that have to be busted. One is that they can't assess residential properties. They certainly can and should, in my opinion. Another is that the majority of property owners that will be assessed must vote affirmatively and register their support for the creation of a bid. That's completely untrue. When New York State adopted the bid law in 1981, they purposely empowered the City Planning Commission and the City Council to affirmatively create bids rather than requiring property owner support, knowing how hard it is to wrangle New York City property owners, especially when most of them are absentee landlords who don't care. Another myth about it is that a bid can't primarily fund parks. The bid law, the state law, is crystal clear. The bid law can be used to fund any district improvements, and district improvements are defined to include parks and open spaces and streetscapes and plazas explicitly. And so there's a lot of myths that I think that get in the way, and it could be a tool for creating a more equitable park system by allowing them to be created in places that really need them, as opposed to just, Madison Square Park and Fifth Avenue.
Yeah, and Claire, I'm sorry I didn't answer that question before. The district that we're forming right now does include both commercial and residential. Residential, especially because of the density on the waterfront of the new buildings created through the rezoning, those residential units are the highest number of properties within the district.
So I think this is a really important place to kind of move in the direction of recommendations for policymakers. Because ultimately, I mean, you brought up some important points, including there needs to be a vision for what a better, more vibrant, more equitable parks and open space system looks like to be able to animate investment with a vision. And there's got to be, I think, a commitment, as Lynn's pointing out, that government's job is to take care of public infrastructure, and this is critical, vital infrastructure. But I think what's new or important about this conversation, maybe not new, as folks have brought up, we've been talking about these issues for years, but what feels timely to me about this is that I think there is an appetite in city government to invest more and more thoughtfully in parks and open space. I think in many ways, New Yorkers have seen it and are now demanding it. Because one of the, I say this all the time, but one of the only good things that came out of the pandemic, maybe the only good thing, was a reawakening of our appreciation for open space and creativity, largely from New Yorkers taking it into their own hands to say, we want to use our city for people in new and creative ways, and we've done it. But we're backsliding right now. We're moving in the opposite direction. Some of the gains that we made since 2020 have started to be reversed. And I would argue, yes, there's political will, yes, there's kind of vision, but there's also the need to sustain that work with the unsexy dollars that support maintenance and programming and staffing. And we haven't seen enough investment. And I guess I would say this sort of charitably to elected officials in the city. That picture's getting tougher right now. It's not like there is this sort of infinite supply of dollars. If we were talking about, let's say, the period from 2001 to 2019, when the city's economy was growing by double digits, so many sectors were adding jobs, our revenues were increasing year over year over year. That picture is very different than where we are right now, with our economy slowing. Job growth has slowed. The economy is not in a recession, but we see warning signs all over New York City and, of course, globally. And so I just say all of this to say I think there is an appetite from folks in government to do more, but also a real fear that by committing more now, there's going to be, even harder choices to make next year and the year after. And I didn't even mention the cuts coming from Washington that are intentionally pushed off until after November. So I mention all this to say I think there's a recognition, maybe a growing recognition, that part of the recipe right now has got to be funding what we need in New York City more sustainably. And so I just wanted to ask you all, and this gets at the big conversation, it gets at the idea of transfers of development rights and other things. As Chris pointed out from the very beginning, we have many of these mechanisms. The city can do them. The Hudson Yards Infrastructure Corporation brought in $490 million last year, and the city was able to create that and didn't require Albany. So we have these mechanisms, but I want to ask all of you, what are the recommendations that you have, if you'll allow my premise that there are folks in government right now that want to do more, but are dealing with a fiscal reality that feels terrifying, frankly, to them. Not even just this year, but going forward, knowing that there's this growing gap. What are some of the immediate or thoughtful next steps, policy recommendations or next steps that you think would help advance these things? So, for instance, Katie, when you're talking about bid formation, what can the city do to make it easier where organizations, and as Chris has pointed out, New Yorkers, advocates, community members may feel like that bid isn't the right model for us because we want to support parks, or SBS has given some seed grants to support merchants associations kind of becoming bids, but they're not interested in supporting parks, or the idea of transfer development rights. City of Yes is creating these opportunities, but we're not seeing kind of appetite yet from policymakers to actually realize more of them at scale, or to be able to assure that dollars that are generated in Midtown could also support the South Bronx. So I'm just curious for all of you, and we can spend some real time here, what are some of the concrete next steps that you think could actually give policymakers some specifics, some marching orders, some items to add to the to-do list that would help them advance some of these ideas?
Everyone's looking at me, so I guess I'll go first. So
only because you're right opposite me,
yeah,
then, but I'm going to look at everybody else too.
So in answer to the fear of, there's a lot of other priorities in the economy, I would argue, if not now, when? Because we have been, as you've heard, tackling this issue for so long. I think it's going to take real leadership. So my one kind of priority action would be, like, if I had a magic wand, would be to sit down with the mayor and say, you have presented this incredible vision to the city of a livable city, an affordable city. And you have all these people willing to think creatively with you on your side to solve what has been a problem since arguably, the 70s. Help us, help you, help New York City, and take the reins, be a real leader with all of us and with the city council to actually have some real change. Be the visionary we know you can be. Yes, that would be my tangible next step, because it's going to take real leadership and organizing of all the agencies and the alphabet soup that it takes to do government to really effectuate the individual policy recommendations that we've made today. We need that mind shift, and we need a leader to do it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right. I think that's right. You need a citywide perspective. Any individual council member or elected official could be championing specific park projects. But even then, they still, and I've heard this from elected officials, I've heard it from agency heads, that some of the ideas, even some of the ideas that are reminiscent of your report recommendations, require things like restricted funds or going to OMB. And, I've heard, I don't know about OMB. They may not want to, right? They may not be willing to take money out of the general fund. That has a lot to do with some of these challenges, and using, political capital, let's say, to put pressure on these city agencies to be able to do something as commonsensical from our perspective as restricting certain revenues or identifying certain value for certain expenses. But those restrictions are potentially taken away from other use, which requires a vision, which requires planning, which requires a notion that is embedded in the process of rezonings, of land use, of development to put these mechanisms in place from the top down. Because what happens with the bottom up is that it breeds the inequity from those grassroots initiatives where that particular project is important to that particular community, when in fact this is a citywide system, a citywide infrastructural operating budget that is deeply underfunded with consistent needs across the board. So I would say go to city planning, go to OMB, and have City Hall force them to implement these systemic changes. Mm-hmm.
Just building on that, and anybody can jump in with some of your ideas here, but we know that there will likely be some new rezonings going forward, right? For the mayor to be able to fulfill his goal of 200,000, affordable units, there are communities that are almost certainly going to see some new density, some new upzonings. And we see some projects right now that have just been approved, but where, shovels aren't in the ground yet. So I'm curious, are there specific ideas there if we want to make sure, look, unlike, let's say, the lessons from 2005 or so in Williamsburg, what should we be doing differently this time? Are there specific mechanisms that we should put in place now to make sure that
Eli,
those
Can
upzonings
I offer?
How
support
about,
parks.
for just 1 second, before the rezonings happen and the environmental review process is going on, how about the chapter on true environmental review for our green spaces is equivalent to the chapters of transportation and of stormwater capture and all the other infrastructure items?
Yes.
You know, like, why should parks and green space be any different? Like, let's start there before, so that the baseline information and data actually forces the conversation on funding and development.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a direction I'm going, but maybe from a different perspective, which is, I think we don't demand that our city agencies actually work together more. We need to make them codependent. If we have a zero waste plan, then we need to make sure that it's in any rezoning and any zoning and our building code, and Department of Sanitation is prepared to work on it. So if we should give, let's go 2% for parks. And then maybe parks would be in charge of giving money to sanitation to work on their community composting program. And so the more we can actually make things synergistic, and I feel like we actually used to have more of a philosophy of synergy in government, and I think that we have to actually say more is more interdependency of agencies. DOT, even more dependency on permeable paving, on better functioning bike lanes that get cleared, all these things. I think some of it is that we've accepted a siloed world, and I think we should not. We should actually push for all of our policies to say, no, your environmental review is a parks review. No, your accessibility review is actually a DOT review, whatever it is.
Well said.
I don't think the city should be considering, and I'm talking to the City Planning Commission and to the City Council, should be considering any significant upzonings without having a zoning incentive system in place and a business improvement district / park improvement district in place. That should never happen again. I'm not talking about small rezonings, but anything that's significant, it should never happen again. I mean, I could talk about changes to laws, and I think you'll probably need a new panel to talk about changes to laws. We're going to run out of time here. But if we're going to just...
I'd love one. If you have one that you think would be especially usul for this conversation, we'd love to hear it.
Well, I was listening to Adam Ganser talk about 1% for parks and how we never seem to get there. And I thought, well, maybe it's time to amend the city charter to require it, because it's not so easy to amend the city charter.
That's a great idea.
And that's probably, and while you're amending the city charter to do that, you allow parks to keep all its earned revenue at the same time. So you hit this like a twofer.
That's great, Chris. Thanks.
That's right.
Major, if you had the
I
mayor's
never
ear,
thought of it
Is there a recommendation, a
until you said it.
specific idea? Sorry, Chris. Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Thank you.
No,
for
I
that.
just realized the park still doesn't keep their own revenue. Right. It's all of it
That's-
just goes directly into the general fund. Wow. Okay. Still, okay. Yeah.
Except for certain parks, which is why we make bids and conservancy.
Right.
The reason Hudson River Park looks good, Majority, is because when the state created it, they gave it the tools to look good,
Right. Right.
to be able to raise its revenue, keep its revenue, sell its air rights. It was empowered to look great, and that's why it looks great.
Yep. Given that option. And that option, it doesn't exist in most other places.
Right.
That is the problem. But I do feel like whether it's changing the city charter to really give parks an opportunity to be what they can be. The other piece is, again, I still feel like we're still not even talking about them as infrastructure. But it would still make much more sense if we were working, if there was like this, if we weren't so siloed. Because it is true, if we're not working together, as a city, if all the agencies aren't, then frankly, the little stepkid that is the Parks Department will never get its full due.
Well, we're talking about carrots, but we're not really talking about sticks. So
Okay.
another idea is that if the city, if there's a certain population that is denied X amount of square feet of access to park, or that their kids above a certain age and seniors are denied access to pools, anything else, there should be maybe, there's a way to penalize, I'm looking at that, at everyone again. Isn't there a way to actually demand something for those neighborhoods and districts that don't have it, or that are suffering from higher particulates in the air or higher asthma rates? Like, I just feel like we are going to depend on carrots forever, but maybe we need some more sticks.
I also think one thing is better understanding the need, and we talk about 1% for art. You know, I'm sorry, we talk about 1% for parks. I see Susan here, and then you know, we talk. I love this Parks Improvement Fund recommendation, but I guess the question is, you know, between the agency's budget, even if it is 1%, between the Conservancy's contributions of philanthropic dollars. And this, you know, value capture fund that's created, what is that total amount, and does that cover the need? I think one question is, how much does our system need? And that is going to be contingent on what's the standard that those parks should be. Because the standards right now is really, again, how much an entity will put into it to create higher quality parks. Whether it's a conservancy, whether it's a developer, what is that standard, and how much, let's say per acre, should we be investing as a city into that space? And once you have that number, then we can really think about, well, you know, this particular recommendation and mechanism will raise X amount of dollars, and this will raise X amount of dollars, and this will raise X amount of dollars, and together we can holistically, finally, plan.
Yeah, I think the couple themes that I keep hearing in this conversation is certainly around the kind of the advanced planning that needs to happen as the city gets denser, as a development happens. How are we ensuring that that is coupled with sustainable investment in parks and open space? And Lynn, you kind of started on that note. I guess as a last thought, and then we'll turn it over to our audience in a moment as well. But I want to ask all of you: is there one specific idea that you have to move this forward? I mean, if we're sitting here finally a year from now and the conversation has shifted, what do you see as essential for us to get there?
I mean, personally, I would love any of these ideas to advance forward. It's like choosing amongst your children to figure out like which should go first, because we've wanted this for so long. What I will say is that leadership, again, is going to be vital. Voices, community support to move any of these ideas along. And what I'll say is, while we're moving these ideas along, please, like, staff the Parks Department appropriately so that it's not a huge unfunded mandate for them again as we continue to implement new policy. That's not fair either to the agency. So, and they're the unsung heroes in the room that, you know, we need to talk about more.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to go back to one, recognizing and acknowledging the inequality that created what we have right now, in the maintenance in particular. But I just also think that, frankly, there are parks that have more. And why are we not considering, you know, just proportionally looking at the parks that are under-maintained in particular, and where we know exactly where they are, and support those in the way that they need to be supported, so that they can actually provide all the benefits that other parks do. And I also think that, you know, there was something that was also done with the Greenway, that there was also a little surcharge that for all new leases along, for businesses that were operating, that were going to come along the Greenway. And just, there was a tiny little surcharge that went specifically to maintenance in those areas. So that is a portion of real estate that I think could be used towards that as well. And, you know, ultimately, we have to be thinking more about just the infrastructure piece. Like, how can we certainly quantify, you know, if we had parks that were actually properly maintained, what would it mean, you know, for our city as a whole, from a health perspective, an environmental perspective, stormwater management, all of those things. And once we put those things together, then I think it does look a little more attractive that our city can be something more through Parks Department that are equitably maintained and created.
Well, thank you, Majora. On that note, if the audience could join me in a round of applause for our amazing panelists. Thank you all so much for your thoughts, your time. We so appreciate it. Now don't go anywhere. We want to hear from this amazing audience. But first, I'm going to bring my colleague, John Sirico, up to share just a little bit more about what we learned. And then we will turn it over to questions and ideas for our panel.
Is this working? Hey, everyone. I'm John Sirico, Senior Fellow for Climate Opportunity here at Center for Interim Future. Just a quick round of applause again for this panel. They were great. I look to so much of you all for leadership on this issue, so it's so great to hear from you all. And I'm really glad to be out this week with this report, along with Tim Tompkins and Eli Dvorkin here. So last time we did this, we looked around the world for solutions when we had a recreation event about a month ago, and here we're going to do things a little bit differently. Yes, we're going to look at solutions abroad and around the country, but also there's a lot of solutions here, and I think what's been missing is this systematic, equitable approach that the council member on this panel brought up. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about harnessing value from upzoning for parks care. Starting with Austin, Texas. Austin is a place that is growing rapidly. It's one of the fastest growing cities in the country. To deal with that growth, they put in a parkland dedication ordinance, which basically, if you're a developer who's building a certain amount of residential units, you're given a menu of options. You can either dedicate land to a park, you could put into a parks development fund, or you could put into a fund that goes around to a citywide to really acquire more parkland, again, to keep up with population growth. Also, Eli's hometown, Toronto, Canada, also has this same exact mechanism on the book. Again, there's flexibility. If you're a residential commercial developer, you're given a menu of options. You have to add some land to somewhere nearby that's either for park or recreational use, or you basically can attach land to a park nearby. So you're given flexibility because every single site is totally different. But we really have done this here, just on a case-by-case basis, right? I'm really glad that Councilmember Krishnan really went into his work getting this done on Queens Boulevard, 5,000 square feet of space for the first time on Queens Boulevard, and also the first pool ever in Elmhurst, Queens. It's a huge achievement. And also, I just want to shout out my friends at New Yorkers for Parks, Kathy and Adam, who did this work also recently with the 1 LIC rezoning, which will add one of the biggest park spaces expansions to Long Island City with the Queensbridge Baby Park underneath the Queensborough Bridge. Similarly, using rezonings to add park space. Okay, next up. Really thinking about leveraging a major moment, major projects. I've got to see firsthand in London, most parks in London are funded by what's known as a community infrastructure levy. So basically every borough has this pot. If you are a developer, you have to pay into this pot and it goes to local infrastructure and parks. When Crossrail opened up, the Elizabeth line, if folks have been to London, the Lizzie line, they basically added entire levy around where the stations were going to be. So if you were a developer building near the Elizabeth line, which already is one of the busiest train lines in the UK, 2 years after opening, you had to pay into a pot that went to local infrastructure and parks. Similarly, Atlanta with the Belt Line, which is already the most popular park in Atlanta, has a tax district around it that if you're a developer buying land near the park, which the park has really inspired and catalyzed, you have to pay into a pot that goes to local infrastructure and community projects. Again, we've done this before here. The city brought the 7 train to Hudson Yards. That was a city instrument, not the MTA and not the state. It was the city that put into a tax district that essentially, on future developments in Hudson Yards, it was able to pay for the 7 train expansion under the Bloomberg administration, and still to this day, it continues to fund open space in Hudson Yards. Thinking about this, though, what if we were to apply this to IBX? What if we were to apply this to the 2nd Avenue subway expansion and maybe Penn Access? Last but not least, the citywide approach. Seattle, Chicago, Minneapolis, they're considered often the best park systems in the country, and that's due in large part because of their funding. All of the city, Seattle, Chicago, Minneapolis, is in what's known as a parks district. If you are a property owner, you have to pay a small assessment fee every year that goes to the park system. We've done this before, though. New York State, the Environmental Protection Fund, is a small surcharge. It's funded by a small surcharge on the real estate property transfer tax. And similarly, the mortgage recording tax, which is basically a one-time fee you pay when you sign a mortgage for a house, it goes to public transportation and goes to government operations. If we think about, we've done these approaches, before. I think what's been missing is a systematic, equitable approach, but we have the solutions around us. And I really want to make that point again. It was brought up here. We have the solutions around us. Now is really the time to advance one of them to get it done. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, John. And if folks want to check out the full report, nycfuture.org. Now I'll turn us over to our amazing audience, including for folks that are streaming online. You can share your questions in the chat, and my colleagues will share them with me. I already see the hands coming up. So microphones will come your way. Just let us know your name if you're here with the organization. Please keep your question brief, under a minute, so we can get to as many hands as possible. We'll start here on the front right, and then over there where you have the hand on the left, and then we'll come back to the right side of the room.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the amazing comments and also the insights. These are very inspiring. My name is Yuxiang Luo. I used to work for OMB, approving funding for parks, which also included a lot of denying funding for parks. I now work at James Lima Plan Development. So we are economic consultants working with community to set up great value capture districts nationally. So I think I had a lot of inspiration today because I think value capture traditionally is very territorial. Like you generate the money from this district and then you spend it locally. And that's how you get a lot of support from the owners to want to pay into this. But today we see a lot of new thinking about this more system-wide approach, more equitable. So my question is, how is it gonna work politically? Like who are the alliances that's traditionally not in this particular conversation that we need to pull in so that we can say have a policy and also the structure for like a Williamsburg developer that wants to pay for park improvements in Midwood. So beyond the moral argument, what are additional ways to think about this to make this work?
May I start? I think you have to have a coalition that includes everything from parkies, let's say all of us, New Yorkers for Parks, elected officials, but you also need real estate in the room, right? You need affordable housing advocates, you need the affordable housing industry and real estate, you need transportation, because that's a key piece of it. It's a cross-sector industry or coalition that needs to be built, I think, to move the needle. And that's not easy. That's no easy task. But I think the more that we can start to have conversations with people that are not within our circle, so we're expanding the network, the easier it will be to build that coalition.
Great, thank you. We'll just keep moving, get some more questions, and then we'll come back to the right side. I see another hand up. Yes, Mr. Bannerby next. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hello, Dennis Markatos, and the leader of the East Coast Greenway Alliance nonprofit. And so we're building a trail connecting cities, and I'm wondering how greenways like the South Bronx Greenway, Hudson River Greenway, how can they build that systematic approach by connecting parks so that we see these parks as connected, not this over there competing with this over there, but how can we pull it all together perhaps in ways that lift up parks throughout New York City and beyond?
Well, I think just to answer that one, I think we're in a magic moment for greenways because we have both our Commissioner of Transportation, who's worked a huge amount on greenways, and again, the growing awareness that continuity is absolutely the key to greenways. So it's, again, I think we're back to the political part, but if we could figure out a mechanism where a greenway could actually be a district or a district connector approach, it's kind of like the IBX. I mean, or like the Hudson River Park. Like, we could start seeing those as worthy of a bid, a conservancy, a kind of mechanism. So I think greenways are just absolutely maybe even more powerful mechanisms to kind of look at cross benefits.
Yeah,
because
very
you get
quickly. It was the specter of the East Coast Greenway that literally bypassed the South Bronx that made me want to write the proposal to get on that thing. It'd be specifically because we were already trying to build parks, and those connections were the kind of things that we felt very deeply that if we're connected to the larger East Coast Greenway, which is obviously connected to every place else in the city, we would somehow be considered more worthy, frankly, of investment, of all the things that we knew greenways meant to every other part of the city. Didn't work that way, unfortunately, and it's because of the inequity that's kind of baked into the system. So greenways, I think, are obviously incredible. I'm so excited to say that we're a part of it, but but because of the underlying systemic issues that are not being humanistically designed to create differences, we're still going to be stuck in this position where we're not feeling the impact, the positive impacts of being near greenways, because ultimately it's just not designed to make it so that we can benefit.
I would just add quickly, they also suffer from some of the same maintenance issues that parks might, and the sort of parcel-like approach to not just the design but the ongoing maintenance, where a developer may come in and commit to investment in the greenway in front of their building, and the next one wouldn't, and so you have a different experience of the quality of that connection. Depending on the immediate stakeholders, and that's just not the way to do comprehensive design.
I would just add to that, I think our report calls for this idea of a Parks Improvement Trust. And part of our thinking there is, look, nonprofits need dollars too. Not all of this work is being done by city agencies. And so, our friend, former OMB, friend maybe can attest to this, the city does not have a great track record of getting dollars out the door to nonprofits, to say the least. Part of our recommendation there is some of the dollars that flow into the trust could be allocated, potentially re-granted through a single master contract with a larger nonprofit to be able to get that money out the door to small community-based organizations quicker and faster than the city ever could, as part of a holistic approach to funding that doesn't only look at the agency itself. I'd love to get some more of our audience members in. I know the microphone's over here, and we'll head just a row in front.
Hi, thank you. Adrian Benepe, former Parks Commissioner. Chris, by the way, thank you for preventing a temporary stadium the size of Fenway Park from being built at Van Cortlandt Park. And Adam, getting to the myth busting on park improvement districts, you may remember way back when under Mayor Giuliani, there was a very strong proposal to create a PID for Riverside Park. It was killed very quickly with the no new taxes, A, and B, there was one of the myths is that you can't do a PID because you have three typologies of buildings, like co-ops, condos, or rental buildings. And the rental buildings would be unable to pass the fees on to their tenants. Is that true or not true?
I don't know how that would work with rent stabilized apartments. I've never thought about whether that could be passed on. I doubt that's true. Certainly if your taxes go up, you can typically pass those on to your renters. I don't know how that works for rent stabilized apartments. That sounds like an argument that would be raised against it by landlords, particularly absentee landlords that don't benefit from Riverside Park but just own the buildings around it. That sounds like exactly the kind of argument. I think, to me, a park improvement district isn't necessarily going to assess buildings hundreds of thousands of dollars each a year. A few $1,000s per building, $25, $50 per unit per year, which is a very low amount of money, could have a transformative impact on neighborhood parks. Maintaining parks doesn't cost what it costs to build sewer infrastructure or water infrastructure. A few $100,000 a year for the Riverside Park Conservancy could be transformative. So the landlord arguments against it, I'm just not sympathetic to.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Here for being here. I'm Maria Roca, Friends of Sunset Park community organization in the Southwest, for those who don't know Brooklyn, of the great borough of Brooklyn. We've been challenged, the community has been challenged from the day the Lenny Lenape sort of stopped being the leaders of that land. So it's a long, long history that continues. I first want to comment Ms. Carter's comment about she's having this conversation being 20 years, 30 years old in her lifetime. I've been in rooms for 55 years having these conversations. Basically the same conversation. And here we are, but let's keep talking, let's not stop talking. So I have like 25 questions that I wrote, but I'm only allowed one, so let me see how I can distill that. I'm not very good at distilling, but I'll try. The law and risk of unintended consequences pop right in my mind. As but first here, when I'm hearing that the infusion of real estate capital is somehow going to be put in the same paragraph with benefits of upzoning. We are too dense in too many places in this city already. And I'm going to stick with Sunset Park and Red Hook and the North Brooklyn and down the bend to Bay Ridge and Coney Island, the waterfronts. We need to, what is the expression?
Get our shit together.
Planned retreat. Planned retreat. We don't have a plan for retreating from the impending ocean. We know this. Anyone who hasn't heard, I don't know where they've been. So Nature magazine just has an article 2 weeks ago about that. Lo and behold, the statistics, the science, the reports about how high our seas are rising is actually not accurate. That is actually already a few inches higher. So first, will the city of New York, because we're here, put all that math into their future planning and all that, so we do not continue acting as if we are dumb and stupid and we don't know, because we are not dumb, we're not stupid, and we do know. So, parks in all of this. Parks should be and industry should be the only thing that should be on our waterfronts. And industry, because we need the jobs. Carefully, what industries we're putting in there, what is the benefit to the city, to the people, the jobs, what kind of jobs, the training that goes with those jobs. No one should be building or even thinking of it, but they are thinking and they're planning and they are ready to put in, bring the equipment and start building. Because this conversation at this point, and I can speak for myself given my age, it's not about me anymore. It's about my child, my grandchild, my great-grandchild, if I get to have any. I won't be around to see that. And it doesn't look good, folks. It doesn't look good, folks, because we're still in this mindset that that we were in a long time, that the land is there to build higher and higher and higher and higher. The hell with the consequences, because by the time the problems begin, look at Boston Harbor. There is PBS is airing the documentary on what has happening in Boston Harbor.
Ma'am, let me stop you there.
I'm going to stop there because you can tell
I do want to hear from our whole amazing audience,
so
but I
let's
truly
just
appreciate
leave
the comment.
We know what the problems are. We know what the consequences are. But why do we keep doing the same thing?
Thank you. Let's take a couple more questions and see if we have time. Maybe even no. You know what? We're actually just about out of time. So.
No, I'm going to stay in the middle.
I'd love to.
On that note, I am going to end it there. Can we get another round of applause for our panelists? I am Stephanie. I'm Cuff's Chief of Staff, and on behalf of our team, thank you so much for coming to today's event. For everybody who tuned in online, another thank you to our panelists, our earlier speakers, Council members Hankerson and Krishnan. A big thank you to the NYC Green Fund for making today's event possible, for making our research possible. Check out and share our new report, and we hope to see you at the next event.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's very good to meet you. I know activities, I work with